They say empaths are gentle souls, always forgiving, always patient, always hopeful, but few ever speak about the silent yet powerful transformation that takes place when that heart has endured too much. It's no longer silence out of fear, but silence from clarity. No longer eyes searching for reasons, but eyes that see straight through the mask. And in that moment, the narcissist loses what they can no longer control, a soul that finally knows its worth. In today's video, we're diving deep into a rarely discussed truth. What really happens when an empath becomes truly angry and stops fearing the narcissist? This isn't a story about revenge. It's a journey of reclaiming inner power, clarity, and freedom from the most insidious emotional manipulation. If you've ever loved too much, forgiven too long, or doubted your own feelings, stay with us until the end of this video, because what you're about to hear won't just help you understand them, it may finally help you understand yourself in the most liberating way. And if you find value in this message or believe someone you know needs to hear it, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because knowledge is power, and you deserve to take back control of your life. They begin to stop playing the narcissist's psychological games, to stop reacting to fake apologies or familiar manipulations. In the past, every time the narcissist came back with sweet words, a sudden hug, or even dramatic tears, the empath would soften. They used to believe that the narcissist's pain was real, that maybe this time things would be different, that love, if deep enough, could heal even the most damaged soul. But not anymore. Now they no longer fall into that cycle, because after countless nights of self-doubt, after too many second chances, they've finally learned something important. Not everything that looks like emotion is love, and not every apology comes from the heart. They start to recognize the pattern. Every time they try to leave, the narcissist returns with a new performance. Sometimes pitiful, sometimes passionately in love, sometimes awakened and full of remorse. But everything always returns to the same place, or worse. They begin to realize that an apology is not always a sign of transformation. Sometimes it's just bait, so this time they don't react. No more explanations, no more arguing, no more trying to make the narcissist understand. They've realized the more they tried to be understood, the more they lost themselves. And the narcissist never truly cared about understanding anyway, they cared about control. Silence is no longer fear, it is awareness. They don't respond to texts because they no longer feel obligated to listen to words that only serve to reel them back into toxicity. They don't feel guilty for setting boundaries. They don't wonder if they're being too harsh for walking away, because now they understand. Cruelty isn't silence. Cruelty is staying in what's destroying you. Every sweet word, every predictable ploy, they now see it all for what it is. And what terrifies the narcissist most is realizing that they've lost control. The tears don't move them anymore. The threats don't scare them. The promises no longer convince them, because the person standing in front of them has changed. They are no longer the self-doubting victim, no longer the one begging to be acknowledged, no longer weak in the narcissist's eyes, but a new version, stronger, clearer, no longer easily manipulated by false affection. So when the narcissist tries to return with old tricks, pretending to be remorseful, saying the right things, they land on deaf ears. The person they used to toy with no longer reacts. They don't explode, they don't mock, they just don't show up to the game anymore. And that absence, that total, cold detachment, is what breaks the narcissist from within. Because now, there's no audience for their performance, no one left to hear their apologies, no one to manipulate with emotion. The game has ended, not with a dramatic finale, but with indifference. And from that point forward, the power dynamic flips, not through loud revenge, but through complete letting go. And then, once the silence has spoken louder than any reaction, once the empathy no longer plays into the narcissist's games, they enter a new stage. They begin to speak the truth. Not to seek revenge, but to protect others from the same cycle they once endured. Because here's something few people admit: a narcissist can only maintain control as long as you stay silent, out of kindness, fear, or shame. In the darkness of your silence, they manipulate their image, pretending to be the victim, the misunderstood one, the person who tried their best. But when you begin telling the story honestly, without exaggeration or omission, you're not just reclaiming your voice, you're shattering the mask they spent years constructing. No more saying, maybe they didn't mean it, or perhaps I was just too sensitive. Now you speak with clarity. Emotional manipulation, blame shifting, gaslighting, psychological control, isolation, and the erosion of your self-worth. You name what you went through, and you share it not with bitterness, not with venom, but with a calm that hits deeper than rage ever could. You don't need to invent anything, because the truth alone is enough to make people stop in their tracks. What terrifies a narcissist isn't that you scream and expose them, it's that you describe everything with composure, detail, and detachment, not to hurt them, but to end the cycle of harm. That calmness, that grounded presence, is something they cannot manipulate. It doesn't come from anger. It comes from a person who no longer fears them. And more importantly, you're not speaking your truth to destroy them. You're speaking to help those who are still on the edge, confused, unsure, exhausted, to recognize themselves in your story and walk away before it's too late. You become a light in the dark, not because you're trying to be a savior, but because you know exactly what it feels like to suffer in silence, to be disbelieved, invalidated, and alone. And if your voice can save someone 5 years, 10 years, or a lifetime of pain, then silence is no longer an option. You start calling out the red flags, the emotional irresponsibility, the sudden shifts from love to coldness, the way they made you question your own mind, the slow erosion of your friendships, your family bonds, your confidence. You describe not only what they did, but who you became while trying to survive it. And strangely enough, truth has a liberating power. Every time you speak, it not only frees others, it heals you. There's nothing left to hide, no more shame, no more feeling like the crazy one. You've seen clearly, and now you let the light touch the darkness. Of course, the narcissist won't stay silent. They may launch smear campaigns, twist the narrative, play the victim to maintain their image. But this time you're no longer caught in the storm. You're no longer scrambling to defend yourself, because those who are meant to understand already do, and those who cling to the lie are no longer your responsibility. You're not telling your story to prove you were right. You're telling it to reclaim your freedom, for yourself and for those still trying to wake up. And it is precisely after the truth is spoken, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with clarity, that a new chapter begins. This is the stage where the former victim decides to establish boundaries. No more compromising, no more going back, no more letting emotions be dragged through the endless loops of manipulation. Because now they understand kindness without boundaries becomes a gateway to abuse. They no longer reply to midnight texts just because maybe they need me. They no longer feel guilty for saying no. They no longer carry the burden of being the healer for someone who refuses to heal themselves. Boundaries are set, clear, firm, and no longer something they apologize for. No more answering unwanted calls. No more agreeing to meet just to talk one last time. No more getting pulled into circular conversations where all blame gets redirected at them. No more explaining why they left, because self-respect does not need permission to exist. To outsiders, this may seem cold or harsh, but only those who have weathered the storm truly know. Sometimes coldness is the last coat protecting a soul from shattering. And from those boundaries they begin to rebuild their life, not in rebellion, but to protect the peace they fought so hard to reclaim. Peace isn't found in the absence of noise. It's found when no one can hurt you the way they used to. The one who was once easily manipulated is now grounded. The one who once hoped for change now only trusts action, and the only action they believe in is walking away. They no longer seek validation for their boundaries. They only require one thing: to honor them themselves, without guilt, pity, or fear of being alone. The strange thing is, once you begin setting boundaries, you don't just push the narcissist away, you also begin to distance yourself from those who unintentionally enabled the pain, those who told you to just give them another chance, be more patient, or don't be so selfish. You become selective. Those who remain are the ones who respect your boundaries. Those who leave were meant to go long ago. And you realize boundaries don't make you lose love. They make you recognize what real love is. To the narcissist, boundaries are a nightmare. They can no longer control your emotions, no longer provoke you just to rescue you. They no longer push you down and then act as your savior. Because that game, it's over. For the first time, you stop living in a state of reaction. You don't react to their anger. You don't react to their fake sorrow. You don't react to their blame-shifting, guilt-tripping, or manipulative gestures. You simply stand firm, and to a narcissist, that is more terrifying than any revenge, because they don't know what you'll do next, and that means they no longer have control over you. You've become unmanipulable, and that's when they lose their biggest source of power, your emotional reaction. From someone who was once shattered, you become the one in control, not to retaliate, but to protect yourself. Your boundaries are not a wall against love. They're a gate that stops destruction from entering, and when you live within those healthy limits, you send a clear message. I'm no longer here to be accepted. I'm here to be respected. Once strong boundaries are set, not through rage, but through clarity, another critical shift happens. The former victim stops carrying the emotional weight on behalf of the narcissist. Throughout the relationship, often unconsciously, the empath bore the burden of irrational anger, emotional instability, and inner emptiness that the narcissist never wanted to face. Every time the narcissist lashed out, the empath tried to calm them. Every time the narcissist blamed, the empath questioned themselves. Every time the narcissist went silent, the empath assumed they had done something wrong, and so they lived in constant fear of someone else's emotions instead of their own truth. But eventually, the empath awakens and they let go. They no longer try to soothe unjustified rage. They stop blaming themselves for someone else's loss of control. They no longer try to make things right when clearly the other person isn't trying. They stop living in a state of needing to be okay just to keep the relationship alive. And when they stop carrying the narcissist's emotional load, a terrifying emptiness starts to surface. The narcissist has no one left to blame, no one left to absorb their toxicity, no one to help maintain the mask, no one to mirror their illusion of power. At this point, they are forced to face what they've always avoided: themselves. And the truth is, behind the narcissist's mask is not a person healing, but a person who refuses to confront their own pain. They can't bear the void inside, so they use others to fill it. But when the empath walks away and refuses to carry it anymore, the narcissist's entire coping system begins to collapse. They become more irritable, more manipulative, more desperate to appear helpless or pitiable. They may even move on quickly, seeking a new source of supply to patch the hole. But the empath is no longer the same. They no longer believe that love alone can fix someone. They no longer feel responsible for another person's chaos. They understand if someone refuses to grow, it's not their burden to carry. They now know healing doesn't come through self-sacrifice. They know empathy doesn't mean absorbing another's destruction, and they know they were never born to carry someone else's wounds, especially not when those wounds are weaponized, and in dropping that emotional burden, true freedom begins. Their mind is no longer consumed with anticipating the narcissist's next reaction. They can breathe again, without tiptoeing, without having to read someone's mood before being themselves. And strangely, in that freedom, they begin to hear their own voice again, a voice that had been silenced for far too long. When they stop carrying the narcissist's emotions, they're not just freeing themselves, they're doing the one thing the narcissist fears most: leaving them alone with their emptiness. And when the narcissist no longer has someone to project onto, the panic begins. But this time, the empath doesn't return. Not out of bitterness, not out of guilt, but because they understand. Real love never requires you to abandon yourself. When someone who has been manipulated for so long finally sets boundaries and stops carrying the narcissist's emotional weight, something remarkable happens. They no longer affirm the illusion the narcissist depends on. You see, narcissists don't live in truth. They operate within a modified reality, one where they are always right, always the victim, always either pitiful or grandiose. They need someone to reflect back their inflated self-image, and empaths, with their deep compassion and desire for peace, often unknowingly become that mirror. For a long time, the empath nods to avoid conflict. They stay silent when the truth is twisted. They concede not because they believe, but because they're tired. They choose quiet, not because they agree, but because they once hoped love could fix everything. But one day, they stop. They stop nodding, stop smiling politely, stop allowing themselves to be rewritten as the bad one just for speaking up. They begin to see things with new clarity, not from fear, but from awakening. And when they no longer affirm the lies, the half-truths, and the long-running performance, the narcissist's mask begins to crack. Because that mask can't survive without someone on the other side believing in it. When the empath stops playing the pretend not to know game, the truth starts rising. Unstoppable. Narcissists who live by controlling others' perceptions suddenly feel exposed. There's no one left to manipulate, no one to help craft their image, no one saying, "I believe you." The refusal to engage in the performance is not an act of rebellion. It's a quiet declaration. I no longer allow you to rewrite my reality. And that shatters the narcissist's world. They grow confused, angry, even desperate. They may intensify their manipulation, using apologies, rage, or deeper levels of calculated sorrow. But this time the empath doesn't react. They refuse to be pulled back into the game. And in that moment, freedom begins. When you stop affirming what is false, you not only protect yourself, you draw a line in the sand between illusion and truth. You're saying, "I see you for what you are." You're saying, "I will no longer be rewritten." And more importantly, saying, "I trust my perception, and I don't need your approval to validate it." That awakening is not the act of a cruel person. It's the act of someone who has finally placed their loyalty in the right place, within themselves. And the narcissist, who has long grown comfortable distorting reality to their advantage, must now face the one thing they cannot endure, someone who sees them too clearly to fear them anymore. And in the end, the most powerful moment arrives, not when the narcissist apologizes, not when they beg to return, but when the empath, the one who once stayed silent, who once cried alone in the dark, rises and walks away without looking back. Their silence now is not surrender, it is sovereignty, a conscious choice to honor themselves more than the illusions they were once forced to believe. They no longer need validation, they no longer crave closure, they have simply stopped reacting. And that is the final blow the narcissist never saw coming, because the truth is this: empaths are not weak, they are resilient in a way the world often misunderstands. They forgive not because they are foolish, but because they believe in the power of healing. They stay quiet not out of fear, but to preserve what little is left of themselves. But once they awaken, they do not seek revenge, they reclaim their freedom. If you are one of these people, if you have loved, forgiven, and hoped, yet now find yourself learning how to let go, know this: you are not alone. This path is not easy, but it is the path of the strongest souls, those who've been broken, yet choose to rise with grace, with compassion, and most of all, with loyalty to themselves. And if this video spoke to you, if you saw your story, your pain, or your healing in these words, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us on this journey of truth, healing, and inner strength. Because the thing narcissists fear the most is you living well, free, and far beyond their reach.